SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation. SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation.
Surf Excel නම් භාගයයි මාසයකට වඩා රිදි සෝතයි.
Tonight, covering up misdeeds. The Archbishop of Colombo responds with fire at government plans to meet with Pope Francis.
We condemn unequivocally this attempt of the government to try to go to the international community and fool them. They are sweet talk. And also to go to see His Holiness the Pope and try to mislead him.
Your guess is good as mine. State Minister neither denies nor confirms central bank governor role rumours. A little while longer, health authorities warn the public to delay pregnancy plans by at least a year. Long gone. WHO emergency expert says that the virus is here to stay.
The public health emergency associated with this virus is far from over.
While its technical lead says the world missed the chance to stop the virus.
We missed the opportunity to eliminate early on in this pandemic. This pandemic did not need to be this bad.
All that and much more coming up on First at 9 this Wednesday, the 8th of September, 2021.
දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයුෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වලකයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dham Kekanaikan. Now, Sri Lankan health experts have urged the general public to consider family planning measures and delay starting a family by at least 1 year. Obstetrician and gynecologist at the De Soysa Hospital for Women, Dr. Harsha Adapattu, made these remarks today, adding that doing so will help prevent issues encountered by expectant mothers during the COVID pandemic. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization is of the view that the world will not see the last of COVID-19 in the long run, and the best end scenario is that it ending as a public health emergency.
We missed the opportunity to eliminate. We missed that opportunity early on in this pandemic. This pandemic did not need to be this bad. This circulation of a respiratory pathogen, a novel respiratory pathogen, in a fully susceptible global population, it would have spread. It would have been very, very difficult to contain, but it didn't need to be this bad. Now the question is, what do we do? How do we use the situation that we are in right now to make that change? It's not too late to turn around to take the severe disease and death out of this pandemic.
What do we do indeed? Well, Sri Lanka last month decided to impose a quarantine curfew to curb the spread. It's not the most popular move the government has made, but was pushed into it by health experts. And it seems to be working, at least on the face of things. There were 2,964 new infections yesterday, a marked decline from the 5,000 plus numbers reported for 10 consecutive days towards the end of last month. In the prevailing situation, various people have been calling on the government to copy-paste the measures adopted in other countries. But the view of the World Health Organization is that the COVID situation in no two countries are alike and need solutions of their own.
And it's when you put strong vaccination program with good personal measures, with support from the government for public health and social measures that are rational, that balance the need of society's freedoms and economic and social freedoms against the need to stop the virus, that you get into that period of good control. Some countries are also struggling to get acceptance for vaccination up to the highest levels, and so each country is in its own set of struggles. Each country is now dealing with almost unique scenarios regarding how they've dealt with the pandemic up to now, what their vaccination level is, what the level of buy-in there is from communities around public health measures, how much support there is for communities to continue those measures. And I don't know right now around the world two countries that are implementing exactly the same policies or in exactly the same epidemiologic situation.
And Sri Lankan health authorities are taking measures to ensure that the balance between the country's economic activities and virus control measures are struck. The current quarantine curfew in place is proof of this, as the restrictions prevent the general public from gathering in masses but ensures that essential services operate.
We have been doing this over and over again, and we have found that once we impose strict travel restrictions and strict health guidelines, the disease trend goes down. But once it is relaxed, it goes up again, and this has been repeatedly happening. And at this time, I would like to urge all concerns and all those who are responsible for the controlling and who has authority over different aspects of social and economic life of our country to take specific actions to make sure that once the country is opened back, there will be no environment conducive to spread the disease once again. If we do the same error again, we will be coming back to square one, and then we'll have to start from the beginning. If you do that only, we can make sure that the opening of the country becomes meaningful.
In the meantime, the prevailing COVID situation has led to a new focus on the family planning front. At the outset of the virus outbreak and for a considerable time thereafter, the belief was that COVID did not pose a threat to expectant mothers or the fetus. But that thinking has now changed.
ඩෙල්ටා වේරියන්ට් එක එනකොට දැන් අපි ගන්නේ කොවිඩ් හැදුනොත් ගර්භිණී සමයේ ඒක අධි අවදානම් තත්ත්වයක් විදිහට. දරුවට හානි වෙන්න පුළුවන්, අම්මට හානි වෙන්න පුළුවන්, කොවිඩ් රෝගය උත්සන්න වෙන්න පුළුවන් ගර්භිණී මවකට කොවිඩ් හැදුනොත්. නමුත් මේක ගැන තියෙන දැනුම අපේ සීමා සහිතයි. ඔබ විවාහ වෙලා දරුවෙක් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා නම්, එහෙම නැත්නම් දරුවන් ඉන්න මවක් නම් නැවත වතාවක් කල්පනා කරලා බලන්න අවුරුද්දකට පෞල් සැලසුමක් පාවිච්චි කරමුද කියලා. අවුරුද්දක් කියන්නේ වෛද්‍ය විද්‍යාවේ ලොකු කාල පරාසයක්. මේ අවුරුද්ද ඇතුළත අපි රෝගය ගැන දන්නවා, අපි රෝගයෙන් ගර්භිණීභාවය ගැන ඇති වෙන ප්‍රශ්න ගැන දන්නවා, දරුවට වෙන ප්‍රශ්න ගැන දන්නවා. ඒ වගේම වැක්සින් එකේ තියෙන අතුරු ආබාධ වෙන්න පුළුවන් ප්‍රශ්න මීට වඩා හොඳ වැක්සින් එකක් අපිට ඉදිරියට එන්නත් ඉඩ තිබෙනවා.
It is just as well that health authorities call for family planning, as the World Health Organization does not see an end to the situation anytime soon. Even when it does, the best the world can hope for is not a holistic end to the pandemic.
If we think about the last pandemic in 2009 of influenza, the predominant strain still transmitting is the virus that caused the pandemic. So I fully expect that this virus will continue to transmit for a very long time. The question is whether it's still causing a public health emergency. And that is determined by how many people it's making severely ill, how many people that virus is killing, and to what extent we've controlled transmission. If we can continue the rollout of vaccines in a more equitable way, if we can keep control on the variants, and we can get to very high herd immunity levels and basically good control measures, then if we can bring the death and the hospitalizations and the tragedy of this pandemic, if we can bring that to an end and we can keep transmission to a very low level, then I consider the pandemic to be over as a public health emergency. But will this virus disappear? No, that's the reality. And it will evolve like previous influenza pandemic viruses. It will evolve to become one of the other viruses that affects us. That's the natural history of these things. The public health emergency is not over yet. That emergency may seem over in some countries, but in many countries, the public health emergency associated with this virus is far from over.
Now then, Sri Lanka's vaccination program targeting the country's 20 to 30-year-old population was expanded to the district of Matara today. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has emphasized the need to bring a halt to transmission of the virus, as the emergence of new variants have been the biggest problem faced by drug manufacturers in coming up with a cure.
It has been almost 2 years since the world was engulfed by the COVID pandemic, and yet vaccination still remains to be the best tool to combat it. Health experts stress that even then, vaccination alone isn't enough, and adherence to good health practices is key to overcome the dangers of COVID. In this backdrop, the World Health Organization touched on possible drugs that can be used in the treatment of COVID patients.
Part of the slowdown on therapeutics has been those variants that have emerged have escaped the effectiveness of some of the original monoclonal antibodies or polyclonal antibodies, which means we have to stay one step ahead of the virus. And that's why doing variant surveillance and keeping an eye on the genetic diversity of the virus is so important, because some of these therapies are very, very specifically designed for a specific strain of the virus. Now, we are seeing new second generation monoclonal and polyclonal antibodies coming on stream that will deal with variant strains, but they're expensive and they're not very available. But we don't have the equivalent drug that kills the virus, and that's what we're missing. And we're missing the same in many other viral diseases. The monoclonal and polyclonal antibodies provide great hope, but they're harder to use when the virus is evolving so quickly, which means that's why we still have to focus on keeping transmission down and stopping the variants emerging, because it's that emergence of variants that reduces the impact of our therapeutics.
Sri Lanka has wholeheartedly subscribed to the COVID vaccination, and the program continues to be worked off even during the curfew. As of last evening, the country had completely vaccinated 9,614,857 persons, leaving 3,337,889 people waiting the second dose. Meanwhile, the country is currently inoculating the 20 to 30-year age group within the Western Province and Galle and the Hambantota districts. And today, this saw another development as the vaccination to that age group was extended to the Mathura district as well.
Sri Lanka has called for the study on the origin tracing of SARS-CoV-2 not to be politicised. Now, issuing a statement today, the Foreign Ministry said that the studies should be based on scientific evidence-based methods. While noting that multilateralism and international cooperation provide the best possible means to effectively and sustainably defeat the pandemic, the ministry also stressed that the importance of conducting a comprehensive, inclusive and impartial study on the origin of the virus. It added that the next phase of the origin tracing study should reflect the key findings of the previous WHO-led joint study report released in March this year. We will see you shortly. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now then, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States has upscaled COVID-19 threat level in Sri Lanka to level 4. It is the highest level of threat there is, and similar moves were made on Jamaica and Brunei as well, owing to what is said, rising number of COVID-19 cases. This means that US citizens are urged to avoid travel to Sri Lanka. It advises that those who must travel to the island ensure that they are fully vaccinated prior to travel. The Ministry of Health said today that the only thing preventing health officials from issuing necessary guidelines for the reopening of schools is a concerted plan by the education sector on how best it could adopt the necessary guidelines it requires to maintain a safe and secure environment for students.
The third wave of COVID-19 made sure that schools were closed. Then, the teachers and principals' trade unions went on strike calling for more pay, refusing to accept all proposals put before them. That meant even online education was deprived to some 4.5 million school children in the country. Though the unions seek to protract the strike with no end in sight, the government is intent on reopening schools the old-fashioned way. But for that, they are awaiting the full vaccinations of teachers in the country. Though other nations across the globe may not be facing teacher trade union issues at this grave time, the school closure is far too common.
Schools operate in communities. So if you can control, first of all, if you can control transmission in those communities, people who work at those schools, people who attend those schools are safer. It's about having provisions in place within those schools, about distancing, about wearing of masks, about making sure there's good disinfection and good ventilation. All of that still stands, but it's about making sure that you make the effort for those who are running those schools to make sure that you prioritize to do it as safely as possible. And individuals, it's about also what you do as parents, as children. It's about how much you mix with others. If you could, take care of yourself as well and try to minimize the amount of interactions you have with others, that also makes that school safe. Because parents and children also have a role to play in this as well. But we all recognize the importance of school, keeping schools open, because in many parts of the world, schools have not opened at all. And this has had a massive, massive detrimental impact on children and their families around the world.
With the availability of vaccines and other countermeasures, we can find a solution for schools that allows schools to stay open safely while we're doing everything else.
In any case, reopening of schools has to be given the go-ahead by health authorities here in Sri Lanka. And their decision depends entirely on the capabilities of the education sector.
අධ්‍යාපන අංශත් සමග නිරන්තර සාකච්ඡාවක සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශය යෙදෙනවා. එඩියුකේෂන් සෙක්ටර් එක කියලා තියෙන ලොකු කොටසක්. මේකට අයිති වෙනවා පාසල් පමණක් නෙවෙයි පාසල් වල තියෙන කැන්ටින් තියෙනවා, ඒවැය සැපයුම්කරුවෝ ඉන්නවා, මේ ප්‍රවාහන පහසුකම් සපයන ආයතන තියෙනවා, ආරක්ෂක අංශ තියෙනවා. ඒ සියලුම අංශ සැලකිල්ලටගෙන මේ අද පවතින තත්ත්වය යටතේ උනත් පාසලක් විවෘත කිරීමට නම් ඒ සඳහා ගත හැකි දැඩි මාරු මාර්ගෝපදේශ තියෙනවා. නමුත් මේක මේ මොහොතේ එවැනි මාර්ගෝපදේශ ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න වාතාවරණයක් මේ අධ්‍යාපන බලධාරීන්ට හැකියාව තියෙනවා කියලා අපිට පෙන්눔 කරොත් අපිට කොළ එළිය දීම ගැටලුවක් නෙවෙයි. අපිට තියෙන ගැටලුව තමයි අපි පැහැදිලිවම දන්නවා පාසල් වලට එන ලෝකයේ ඔය අධ්‍යාපන පහසුකම් පටන් ගත්ත පාසල් තියෙන ඔය දියුණු රටවල් වල ලංකාවේ වාගේ පාසලේ ළමුන් 1000ක් ඉන්න පාසලක් කියන්නේ අති විශාල පාසලක්. ලංකාවේ එහෙම නෙවෙයි පාසලක ළමුන් 2-3000 ඉන්නවා 7-8000 ඉන්නවා. ඒ වගේම තමයි ළමුන් කිලෝමීටර් 30-40 ඈත ප්‍රදේශවල ඉඳලා ගමන් කරනවා. මේ තත්ත්වය තුල තමයි අපි මේක දිහා බලන්න ඕනේ. එතකොට අපි මේක ආරම්භ කරන්න අවශ්‍ය කරන වැඩපිළිවෙලක් ප්‍රසිද්ධියේ අපිට අනිත් සියලු දෙනාගේම දැන ගැනීමට සලස්වලා ඉදිරිපත් වුණොත් මම හිතනවා අද වුණත් මේක ආරම්භ කිරීම ගැටලුවක් නෙවෙයි. නමුත් එසේ නොවි මම හිතනවා දෙමව්පියෝවත් කවුරුවත් සූදානම් නැහැ පාසල් අරින්න.
Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit today hit back at Prime Minister's and the Foreign Minister's plans to meet the Pontiff, labelling it a move to mislead both the international community and the head of the Catholic Church. His comments come at the heels of reports of plans by PM Mahinda Rajapaksa and Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Pires to meet with His Holiness Pope Francis at the Vatican to brief him on the Easter Sunday terror attack investigations. His Eminence also stated that the government's hesitancy to expose key figures implicated through the investigations leaves the Church with no choice but to suspect government complicity in the conspiracy.
Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit responded to reports of a plan by Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Pires to seek an audience with His Holiness Pope Francis, where they expect to brief the Pontiff on progress into the Easter Sunday attack investigations. This comes in the backdrop of attempts by the Foreign Minister to meet with His Eminence the Cardinal, which have not borne fruit so far. At a media briefing held today, His Eminence condemned the move and accused the government of trying to mislead the international community in the face of its blatant inaction into the attacks.
When we are faced with such a situation where the government wants to go to the international community to solve problems, we have no other option but to ourselves condemn this move. But all the same, since this is a very secret plan that is being hatched by the government to try to undermine truth and try to get international sympathy for their inaction, for they are trying to hide the facts, for they are trying to manipulate the entire events surrounding the Easter attacks, that we are forced to give this press conference today. We condemn unequivocally this attempt of the government to try to go to the international community and try to fool them with their sweet talk, and then also to go to see His Holiness the Pope and try to mislead him.
In addition, the Cardinal also accused the government of a lack of interest in investigating suspicions of a grand conspiracy alluded to by the former Attorney General Dapuda de Oliveira, and stated that it was his belief that the terrorists could not have organized such a large-scale operation without the support and guidance of someone with the power and wherewithal to do so.
The former Attorney General, Mr. Dapuda de Oliveira, he made a statement that this was a grand conspiracy. Actually, this kind of project is a grand conspiracy because ragtag band of 7 or 8 suicide bombers cannot do such a thing. They needed brainwashing over a long time. They needed the technology to find and make the bombs. They needed the conviction to commit suicide. All of these require time and all of these require support. So there is somebody who is behind all this. We want to know who that is. That we are going ahead with our plans to find justice for our people. 269 people were murdered in cold blood. Families were completely broken. Some people are still on wheelchairs and on beds, permanently disabled. And I say that we are very sad about this approach to try and go and fool the international community, and the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister doing that is a serious lack of maturity in deciding on what is to be done.
In conclusion, His Eminence also stated that the government's hesitance to expose certain key figures leaves the Catholic Church with no option but to suspect that it may have been part of the conspiracy.
Why is the government trying to protect some people? Is the government part of the conspiracy? We have to deduce from that fact that the government is part of the conspiracy also, that they are trying to protect some people and not letting the conspiracy come out.
Now then, in a statement released a short while ago by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the ministry denies that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Pires have sought or received an invitation to meet His Holiness Pope Francis on their official visit to Italy. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister will shortly make a visit to Bologna, Italy to participate in an international event which is to be graced by the Prime Minister of Italy and other dignitaries from Italy as well as other European countries. The Prime Minister is scheduled to deliver the keynote address at the opening session of the International Symposium, which will be held in one of Europe's oldest seats of learning, the University of Bologna. Moving on with other news, State Minister of Money, Capital Market and State Enterprise Reforms Ajit Nivard Cabral neither confirmed nor denied speculation today that he is tipped to resign his National List seat in Parliament and once again take over as the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. During a media briefing to address opposition accusations levelled at the Finance and Securities Exchange bills passed in Parliament yesterday, the State Minister also denied claims of him having claimed a pension from the Central Bank due to him from his previous 8.5 years stint in the position.
Following the passing of the Securities and Exchange Commission Bill in Parliament yesterday, State Minister of Money, Capital Market and State Enterprise Reforms Ajit Nivard Cabral addressed opposition accusations today. The State Minister stated that despite what its detractors claim, the intention of the bill remains solely to strengthen the legal framework in order to give prospective investors peace of mind in terms of protection and regulation.
ඒ පනතෙන් අපි අදහස් කරන්නේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ කොටස් වෙළඳපොළ ඉතාමත්ම ඉහළ මට්ටමකට නියාමනය අතින්, කටයුතු අතින්, තාක්ෂණය අතින්, ගනුදෙනු අතින් ඔස්වා තැබීමට. ඒක ඉතාමත් වැදගත්. මොකද ආයෝජකයන් රටකට එනකොට ඒ ආයෝජකයන්ට පුළුවන් වෙනට අවශ්‍යයි විශ්වාසයකින් ඒ රටත් සමග ගනුදෙනු කරන්න. ඒ රටට ආවිල්ලා කටයුතු කරද්දී තම තමන්ගේ ආයෝජන ආරක්ෂා වෙයි කියලත් ඒ අයට ඉතාමත්ම පැහැදිලි මතයක් එයාගේ සිත් තුළ පැනනගින්නට අවශ්‍යයි. යම් කිසි අසාධාරණයක් සිදු වෙලා නම් ඒ පුද්ගලයාට ඒ පිළිබඳව නීති අනුව කටයුතු කරන්නට හැකි වෙනට ඕනේ. නියාමනය කරන අයට ඒක ඉතාමත් හොඳින් නියාමනය කර ගැනීමටත් ශක්තිය සහ නීතිමය
Further addressing the finance bill that was also passed yesterday, the State Minister responded to accusations that the bill would provide an opening for black money and illegally amassed money to be laundered, stating that similar legislation has been enacted by a score of countries looking to offer amnesties for tax avoiders to participate in the country's regular economy.
බොහෝ රටවල් වල තියෙන වගේ සමාන්තර ආර්ථික කටයුතු සිදු වෙන ප්‍රවණතාවයක් තිබෙනවා. ඒකට කියනවා parallel economy කියලා. එවැනි සමාන්තර ආර්ථිකයක් ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙන්නේ යම් අවස්ථාවලදී බොහෝ දෙනෙකුට Tamanගේ මුදල් සාමාන්‍ය ආර්ථිකමය කටයුතු වලට යොමු කරන්නට බැරි වෙන අවස්ථාවල. එහෙම කරන්නට බැරි වෙන අවස්ථාවල එකක් තමයි ඒ මුදල් වෙනුවෙන් බදු නොගෙව්වම මේ මුදල් ආර්ථිකයට එකතු කර ගැනීමට දුෂ්කරතාවයක් තියෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒ නිසා 1%ක බද්දක් ගෙවලා ඒ මුදල් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අපේ කටයුතු සිදු වෙන ආර්ථිකයට යොමු කර ගැනීමට අවස්ථාවක් සියලු දෙනාට ලබා දීලා තියෙනවා. ඒකෙන් කියවෙන්නේ නැහැ මේ මුදල් කළු සල්ලි එහෙම නැත්නම් නීති විරෝධී සල්ලි කියලා. ඕස්ට්‍රේලියාවේ, බෙල්ජියමේ, කැනඩාවේ, ජර්මනියේ, ග්‍රීසියේ, එංගලන්තයේ, ඉන්දියාවේ, මැලේසියාවේ, පාකිස්තානයේ, ෆිලිපීනයේ, පෘතුගාලයේ, රුසියාවේ, දකුණු අප්‍රිකාවේ, ස්පාඤ්ඤයේ, ඇමරිකා එක්සත් ජනපදයේ ඒ සියලුම රටවල් වල මෙවැනි නීති රීති සකස් කරලා ක්‍රියාත්මක කරලා තියෙනවා.
In addition, he also responded to recent reports of him having claimed pension benefits from his stint as central bank governor.
මම මුලින්ම කියන්න ඕනේ මම විශ්‍රාම වැටුප හැටියට සත්‍යයක්වත් අරන්නේ නැහැ. මේ රජයෙන්වත් මොන රජයකින්වත් අරන්නේ. මම තීරුබද රහිත වාහනයක්වත් අරන්නේ. මම මහා බැංකුව අධිපතිවරයා හැටියට අවුරුදු 8මාරක් විතර සේවය කෙරුවා. මට ඒක ගන්න තිබුණා. නොගෙව්වයි කියලා මට ඒකෙන් ලොකු පාඩුවක් සිදු වෙලා නැහැ.
Further, with speculation rife of an imminent change at the helm of the central bank, with the state minister tipped to resign his parliamentary seat in favour of the position, the state minister had this to say.
මම ඒ පිළිබඳව මට ඒ කතාව ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරන්නත් බෑ. ඒ කතාව තහවුරු කරන්නත් බෑ.
Moving on with other local stories, the Court of Appeal has ruled that the COVID-19 pandemic situation cannot be considered as a special reason to grant bail to suspects in custody. The ruling followed the dismissal of a revision application submitted on behalf of a suspect who is under remand custody over drug-related charges. He had been arrested in Chilau last year in connection with the seizure of a large volume of heroin weighing up to 67 kilograms. The revision application had sought the appeals court to release the suspect on bail on the grounds of the risks of the novel coronavirus, taking it into account as a special circumstance. Now to take a look at the Colombo Bulls. Shares slumped for a third straight session today, dragged by heavy losses in financial and industrial companies. The CSE All Share Price Index was down 3.61% at 8,764.21 points at the closing bell, its worst day since the 16th of February. Meanwhile, the S&P SL20 index of more liquid stocks fell 79.48 points to close at 3,335.98. With that, here's Dimantha Matthew with a brief report on today's market performance.
The market saw a major plunge today as the ASPI declined by around 328 points. So at the start of the day itself, we saw selling pressure gradually mounting, and towards the midday there was significant amount of selling pressure across the board on all retail favorite counters. So we saw a gradually accelerating decline, and then the market bottomed out around 8,664 levels and falling by 428 points before somewhat of a recovery was seen in the index. So finally the index closed at 8,764 points, where we saw a decline of around 328 points. So S&P SL20 was slightly more stable than the ASPI index, though it also declined. The decline was only around 79 points.
In the currency market, the Sri Lankan rupee remained at around 203 range against the US dollar today, according to the central bank's daily buying and selling rate. Now let's take a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee traded against other major currencies during the day. And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.